Good morning, Saints. It's 4:44. Don't know what that means. a.m. on Saturday, July 14th, 2018. Want to release something that I was going to try and release yesterday before going to work, but ran out of time. In regards to, Jesus said in Revelation chapter 3, verse 21, "He who overcomes will I grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and was granted to sit with my Father on his throne." So a couple questions is exactly what are we overcoming? And another question is, when did Christ overcome? Just as he said, just as I have overcome and was granted for me to sit with my Father on his throne. When did he overcome? So first question we'll answer, what exactly are we overcoming? It's overcoming the world. It's overcoming the Antichrist spirit, which is the spirit of iniquity. This is the very root, is the spirit of iniquity. And so when did this iniquity first appear? If we go to Ezekiel chapter 28, I believe it's verse 14, it said that Lucifer was perfect in all his ways until iniquity was found in him. What is that iniquity? It is the Antichrist spirit. It is a spirit of independence, rebellion from God that comes out of a place of being one with him and totally dependent upon him, to coming and functioning out of, instead of functioning in one with him, one will, there is an independence and then functioning out of your own will. As Lucifer said in Isaiah chapter 28, no, it's not Isaiah 28. I think it's Isaiah chapter 14, verse 13, where he said, "I will ascend into the heavens. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit in the mount of the congregation on the sides of the north. I will ascend above the clouds. I will be like the Most High." So out of this Antichrist spirit comes the self-will. And then from the self-will comes the desire. And then from the desire comes the sin. That's the progression. And so David says in Psalm 51, "I was shapen in iniquity in his mother's womb." And so when we come from the Father of lights and we are sent into this world, our spirit, when we are formed in our mother's womb, we come into this fallen world and we are shapen in iniquity. This spirit that is in the world how to exactly say it, this spirit that in the world has that influence in us as soon as we are shapen in our mother's womb. And whether you want to say it's DNA, however that manifests itself, because we know that the iniquity of the fathers is passed down generation to generation to generation. And this is that Antichrist spirit that we must overcome. And so just a short intro there on iniquity. So how do we overcome this iniquity? Proverbs chapter 16 verse 6 says, "By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged." By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged. This Antichrist spirit. So in overcoming the world, we are to overcome this Antichrist spirit, and we overcome it by coming before the throne. Mercy and truth is the person of Christ. It's entering into him and coming before the Father at the throne. In mercy, the throne is established. Isaiah chapter 16 verse 5, "In mercy the throne is established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David." So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So that's what we must overcome, this Antichrist spirit, the self-life, this independence from God. That, as it says in Jeremiah chapter 17 verse 9, that the heart of man is deceitful above all measure and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Because of this iniquity. I, the Lord, search the hearts and try the reins, to give unto every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doing. A glorious high throne, verse 12, from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. So you see here the juxtaposition of these two things, of the throne and of iniquity in the heart of man, the deceitfulness in the heart from that iniquity. That is what must be overcome to ascend to the throne, that it would be granted for us to sit with Christ, with the Father at his throne. And so when did Christ overcome? When did he overcome the world? When did he overcome the Antichrist spirit? Just as he said in Revelation chapter 3 verse 21, "He who overcomes will I grant to sit with my Father on his throne, as I also overcame." And was granted for me to sit with my Father on his throne. Was it at the cross? Was it at the Mount of Transfiguration? At the cross, we know that he bore our sin, our transgression, and our iniquity. He bore that for us, but that's not where he overcame it. Was it at the Mount of Transfiguration upon Zion, where Peter says that he was crowned with glory and honor? No, that's where he became the corporate head of all humanity, so that he could bear the sin, so that all of it could be brought on him, and he could pay the price for all of humanity at the cross. No, it wasn't at the cross. It wasn't at the Mount of Transfiguration that he overcame. It was when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and he was led into the wilderness to be tempted of the wicked one, the devil. And it is there that he was tempted in three ways: the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Just as Adam and Eve were tempted in those three realms, and they fell in all three realms, and they were overcome of that wicked one, and iniquity entered into the world at that moment. Just as when iniquity was found in Lucifer. When Lucifer invited those thoughts and his mind went that direction, and he began to depart from the Lord. And when that iniquity was found in him, what? He was cast out of the throne. He was cast out from heaven, where he walked in the midst of the stones. And so that iniquity entered into the world when Adam and Eve gave place to that iniquity in their own hearts. And thus, Adam, as the corporate head, that passed down unto all mankind, because he was the corporate head. That's why Christ at the Mount of Transfiguration had to become the corporate head, so that he could form a new race, a new generation in him that could overcome the wicked one. That he could take us back to this glorious high throne, which from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. So at the garden, not at the garden, but in the wilderness, where Christ was led in the wilderness and he fasted for 40 days until his flesh cried out in hunger. It's not till 40 days, if in a perfectly healthy person, that your flesh will truly cry out, because you can be approaching the point of death in your body. Our normal daily hunger pains are not a true need of our body. That's just, we've conditioned our bodies to eat on a regular basis. And but when you fast, and you fast for a certain period, there'll come a certain point where you lose your appetite, but at a certain point it will come back. That your body's saying, I must eat. And that was at 40 days. And that's typically around 40 days, depending on the health of the individual. And of course, 40 days, 40 speaks of probation, a probationary period. And so Christ had fasted 40 days, and of course the tempter came to him and said, if you be the Son of Man, turn these stones into bread. And what realm of temptation was that in? That was in the lust of the flesh. See, as John said in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, I believe it is, all that is in the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passes away, and the lusts thereof, but he that does the will of God abides forever, abides before the Father forever. See, he who does the will of God, see, it's coming out of the self-will of iniquity, of that independent spirit, that Antichrist spirit. So the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life are all those that come from this world that tempt us into this Antichrist system, that keep us in a place of independence from God. And so here Christ was tempted in all three realms because he had to overcome. And so turn these stones into bread. This is in the realm of the lust of the flesh, as his flesh was crying out, it's time to eat. And so does Christ show his dependence upon the Father, or does he go with what the flesh, the desire of the flesh, is drawn to? Because there he could turn those stones into bread. Does he function independent of the Father, or according to the Father's will? You know, we might say, I need a new car. I like that car. So I'm just going to work extra hours, or I'm going to do what it takes in the world to get that car. Is that truly dependence upon the Father? Or is that, in a sense, serving the devil? If you will bow and serve down, I will give you all of this. Turn these stones into bread, and Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Christ is saying, I do not function independent of my Father, but only what the Father says, that will I walk out of, that out of his will, not out of an independent will. And of course, then we go to another temptation. I forget which was first. But we know he took him up upon the pinnacle of the temple and said, cast yourself down. And he said, you know, that the angels of the Lord shall bear thee up. He was perverting Psalm chapter 91. This Psalm 91, which is a psalm of abiding before the Father at the throne, abiding in the Father's will. And here Lucifer perverts it, this Psalm 91, and in the perversion is the pride of life. This is, he's tempting him in the pride of life. See, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and pride of life is the three realms of the body, soul, and spirit. Lust of the flesh is the body, the pride of life is in the soul, and the lust of the eyes is in the spirit. You might go, well, the lust of the eyes, that seemed like that would be in the realm of body or soul. But see, the lust of the eyes begins with the eyes of your heart turning away from the Lord and beholding the realm of this world. And so that was the initial, what happened to Adam and Eve when their heart was turned. They were created to behold the Lord in their heart. And they turned away from beholding Him, their true identity, and entered into another realm. And so Jesus was first tempted in the realm of the flesh when Lucifer turned these stones into bread. And Jesus essentially said, no, not my will, but my Father's will. I'm waiting for His voice. I live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of my Father. That's my bread. And in this other realm, He takes him up to the pinnacle and said, cast yourself down. The angels of the Lord shall bear thee up in their hands. That was the last one, wasn't it? The last temptation, as I recall. Here is Lucifer, the devil, the wicked one, is tempting him in the realm of the pride of life. In the realm of the soul. See, this is what Scripture talks about. Do not lift your soul up unto vanity. That's the pride of life. It is acting independent of the Father. It is the sin of presumption. It is well, we'll go there in a little bit. The sin of presumption, the pride of life, presuming God to do in our own will, to function our own will and still think that He's going to intervene to save us. It's presuming upon God before hearing His voice and saying, I'll do this and the Lord will save me, when it wasn't the Father's will, but we're heeding another voice. Presumption. You know, I'm reminded of a story from Henry Groover when he was there was a season where he was remitting sins in the land, and he was going to these areas where throughout the U.S. where giants had been in the line, giants had been buried, Nephilim, and he was, at the time, the Lord had directed him to pray over certain areas, but on his way back from this one trip, he was not necessarily on that assignment, but he came across an area, I don't remember where it was, But he came up to this area and it showed these where they had excavated, and I'm not telling the story very well here, but supposedly these giants were up to 30 feet tall that they had discovered in these mounds, that different cultures had worshipped these giants. And so Henry decided he was going to go on top of this mount and come against those principalities, those spirits of those Nephilim, and deal with them there. The Lord did not specifically tell him to do that. He was on his way home from another trip, and he happened upon this place and said, I'm gonna take this ground for the Lord. And it was middle of winter, horribly cold, and as he was coming down from this mount, he slipped and fell with his face into the snow, and he could not get up. There was a force holding him down, and he was getting colder and colder and colder, and he could not get up. He began rebuking this thing, and nothing to no avail. And he finally cried out to the Lord and was like, Lord, I'm going to die here unless you intervene. And the Lord spoke to him and said, I never told you to do this. You know, when the time comes, you go and you pray and you prepare yourself. The time comes when I tell you to do this. And so Henry shares this story, the sin of presumption, that he entered into presumption, and assuming that it was the will of the Father because he had this thought, and he, in his own will, did it, and he almost lost his life. He got up and got into the car and wrapped up in a ball, and it took him for, I forget how long he said, just to warm up enough to be able to even drive. How often we function in the sin of presumption because of this Antichrist spirit. That is the Antichrist spirit. The lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Lust of the flesh, the pride of life, and the lust of the eyes. Okay, so the temptation of the tempter to Jesus, he took him on a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and said, if you will serve me, I will give you all these kingdoms. The lust of the eyes. See, it's the eyes of the heart turning from the Lord and beholding the Lord, and turning and beholding all that this world will give you. That's a temptation that comes to us daily, isn't it? You know, he says, I can give you security. Just, you know, you sock away into that 401k, into retirement, you can have security. Just do the system. Just do the system. Don't trust your God to provide But if you do my system, if you do my way, I can give you whatever you want. And I'm not saying don't work, but I'm saying there is a place of total dependence on Him that we must come to. Because when we can no longer buy nor sell, it doesn't matter what we have in our retirement, it's not going to matter. Because we're not going to be able to buy or sell in His system anymore. Will be the final test. Are you going to serve me, or are you going to serve your God? When your life is on the line and you no longer have food, you can't buy food. Are you going to be able to truly live from that place? Or are you going to cave to those temptations to preserve your life? Or will you overcome? Just as Jesus overcame here. And He said, "Depart from me." And all three of those temptations, of course, Jesus fought them with the Word of God. I did not address that with all those, but with the truth, didn't He? With the truth. By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged. This Antichrist spirit. You know, really, there's so much more here to talk about, of course. But just wanted to release a little bit of that. Now, how do we overcome? Do we have to overcome that in the same realm? No, Jesus said in John chapter 16, "Be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." And when we truly enter into Him, we overcome this world. When we enter into Him by faith, when we enter into mercy and truth, who is Christ, we come before the Father at the throne to live out of His will, to become totally dependent upon Him, where we humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, under His hand of mercy. In the shed blood of Jesus Christ, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb, the mercy, and by the word of their testimony, the truth. And they loved not their lives unto the death. He who overcomes will I grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and was granted to sit with my Father on His throne. Holy Spirit, teach us to live from this place, that by mercy and truth iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord men depart from evil. God bless you all.